Hi guys, in this tutorial we're going to be talking about modeling. First of all, before starting with the modeling, we need to access the units. Okay, as usual, by default, 3D Max uses units, which is generic units, which doesn't have a unit. Okay, if we want to change this into a unit that we use in terms of inches, feet, meters, centimeters, we have to access it from here. Customize, unit setup, and then we have to change this generic unit into the unit that we use. In my case, I'm going to go to metric units, and in metric units, you can use whatever metric unit you want. For example, in my case, centimeters. If you say OK, then this grid changes to centimeters. The only problem we have is that grid is 25.4. What does it mean? It means each one of those grids, this cube or this rectangle or the square, it's 25.4 by 25.4. In my case, I prefer that this number be a full number, to be like 10 or 1 or 100, doesn't go 25.4 because this is a conversion between inches and centimeters in my case. So customize unit setup. So when I change this into centimeters, just go to system unit setup and then make sure that this is not inches anymore. It is the same unit you're using here. In my case, it's centimeters. So each one unit equal 1 centimeters. And then when I say OK, you can see that the grid is equal at 10 centimeters. It doesn't make sense, or it's not a big problem, but it's just more clean. So this is how we change the units in my case. Now I'm just going to access, let's say for example, I'm just going to draw a teapot. This is a lovely teapot. Okay, and if I want to change this teapot or move this teapot or rotate or scale, I can rotate or move or scale this teapot using this point over here. So it's rotating from this point and it's scaling from this point. Okay, this point is called the pivot point. Okay, which is the point of action. In other softwares, it's called anchor point. Let's say in Adobe, or in let's say AutoCAD, it's called the base point. It's the same point, which is the point of action, where we have to move or rotate or scale. In my case, this teapot, usually if I want to animate this teapot later on, I want to move it and then rotate it. Okay, for example, I want to pour some liquid in here. You see it's rotating from this point. In my case, if I want to go realistically, it should rotate from the handle because this is where the character is going to be holding it. So I need to move this pivot point to this location. To move any pivot point, you have to do the following. If I go up here to the control panel, okay, we have the create tab and then the modify tab. So we have to access the third icon, which is the hierarchy. Inside the hierarchy, I can affect my pivot point. So affect pivot point only. If you see, if I turn it on and off, you can see the gizmo here changes to this thing, okay, which is like the move tool, but it's a bit thicker. So now if I move this, you can see I can move the pivot point only, okay? So I'm moving this pivot point from this location, wherever I want, to wherever location I want it to be. For example, I want it to be somewhere here. When I'm done with that and to save it, I have to turn off my affect pivot. So now it's going to be moving the teapot and rotating the teapot also. And same thing, I will be scaling my teapot from this point. Okay, so this is usually how to change the pivot point. If I go affect pivot point only, okay, I can also go affect object only. In this case, I just move the object and keep my pivot point in location. Sometimes we will need this case just to move the object and keep the pivot point snapped in a position which we needed. Okay, or also I can go to affect pivot point only and I can center to object, which will go to the center of the volume of the object, or I can align to an object or align to the word, or I can reset pivot. Okay, so if we need these, we can just use them. They are like shortcuts. It will help me to do it faster. In my case, I'm just going to put my teapot in here, my pivot point in the teapot, and this is good. Now, if I want to move this pivot point, so I'm moving it from this point and rotating from this point and so on. If I want to do a mirror of this teapot. To do a mirror, I can access the mirror tool or the mirror icon from here, or I have to go to Tools, Mirror, just above the array and alignments. Okay, mirror. And now it mirrored this teapot on x-axis, so this way, and you can see the original one is flipped into the x-axis. We can change it into the y-axis or the z-axis, depending on this point. Okay, so we have to make sure that the pivot point is the point of action. And on the second option on the mirror, we can add a clone. So by default, it's no clone. I can add a clone, so it keeps the original one and it copies a mirror of it. And this offset is basically how much I need distance from the pivot point, the mirror we want, compared to the other point. So if I want this teapot to be mirrored based on this line or any other object, all we have to do is just move my pivot point from this point to this point. To make sure this is 100% accurate, we need to snap it. So I can snap my pivot point as if it's any other object. So I'm going to turn on my 3D snap. I'm just going to make sure I have grid points on, which are the grid points. And I'm going to move this point from this location. Just make sure my vertex also on. So I'm just going to move this point to this location. So I'm just making it snap on this black line, which is the 0, 0, 0, 0. And then I'm just going to save my pivot. Now if I go mirror, it's just going to, with the copy, just going to be mirroring this teapot to the other side with respect to this line, or with respect to the teapot, to the midpoint, or the pivot point we have. All right, so that's concerning the pivot point. Now, any object, I'm just going to go to Affect Pivot Point, and I'm going to go Reset Pivot to where it was, or Center to Object, which are quick shortcuts, and I'm going to keep it like this. So this is my teapot. Any object that I've created in terms of teapot, box, sphere, cylinder, anything, let's say tube or whatever. Okay, if you select these objects and you go to modify, you can modify its parameters. For example, I selected the tube. I can select my radius, my inner radius, my height, and I can access my segments. I will talk about segments in a minute. Same thing for the boxes. I can access length, width, and height. Same thing for the sphere. Same thing for the teapot. So if I want accurate measurement, because we're working with units now, so I can make sure that the outer radius is, let's say, 20 centimeters and the inner radius is 18 centimeters, which means 2 centimeter thickness, and the height, let's say, it's 80 centimeters, and we're going like really accurate. The other things are the segments of each one. We can see there's always segments. The segments are basically the division of the object, more smooth or not. To see the segments by default, you cannot see it, but you can see it in the other viewport. You can see the segments in here, okay? And the shading viewport, you cannot. Default shading, in here it says wireframe, wireframe, wireframe. What if I want to change this into wireframe? We can just go default shading and we can go wireframe. And you can see it wireframe, and then you can turn it back default shading. What else if I want to see them both at the same time? You can just go to default shading and just activate edge faces, so you can see the wireframe on shading. These have shortcuts. The first shortcut is F3. It's shifting between wireframe and shading, okay? And F4, while we are in shaded mode, F4 it turns on the wireframe on shaded, or something called edge faces. So usually when we are modeling, we keep this active so you can see the definition and the division of each object to start modeling and deforming the object. So now if I select this tube, I go to the height segments. These are my height segments. The more segments I have, the more details I have, okay? In the height, in this case, it's not affecting anything. But if I go, for example, cap segments, same thing, nothing will happen, but I'm adding segments on the cap, on the top edge. If I go to the side segments, it will make a difference. The more segment I have, the smoother the circle is going to be. The less segments I have, the more jagged and low res this is going to be. Same thing is applied for everything. For example, teapot, I have segments. The less segments and the more segments. Same thing for the sphere, less segments and more segments. And some of them, they have more options. For example, the sphere in my case, I can also add a hemisphere. If I don't want the full sphere, I can have half of it or maybe quarter or whatever. This is the value. It's from 0 to 1, which is 1 is 100% and 0 is 0%. And I can also slice it. So if I don't want to have the complete circle, I can just slice it left and right. Okay, this is applicable, I think, for the tube, and same thing for the cylinders and so on. So each one of those you can just access its parameter. For example, the teapot has different options. You can add parts. For example, it comes with a body, handle, spout, and lid. For example, I can turn off the spout and lid, and I end up with like kind of a coffee cup. Okay, so same thing, I can just turn off the handle and maybe put the lid, and I have something else, and I can work with this to start my process. So this is basically a quick introduction to model. Now, to the modifier, sorry. So now I'm going to start with some of the modifier parameters or stack or the modifier list. I'm just going to add few things. Let's say cylinder. I'm going to add a box. I'm going to add a sphere. I'm going to add, just make sure this is a complete sphere. I'm just going to add also a plane. Okay, so each one of those, using the modifier tab, I can access the parameter. What if I want this cylinder to bend? I can access the modifier list. There's a list of modifiers that give me some kind of simple actions that make things easier to do. For example, what I said, bend. So if I go, I access bend, or I can just press BE or BEND quickly, I can access the bend tool. So I add a bend tool to the cylinder. Now, I have to make sure here, on the stack of my modifier, I have the cylinder, where I have the modifier of the cylinder, and then I have bend, which have the modifier of the bend. Okay, and the layers are just above each other. And now you're gonna understand at the end what's the difference. So I have a bend tool. Okay, I can turn it on and off using this visibility eye. Okay, at the same time, I can access the bending tool. So let's say this is the angle. For example, I want 90 degrees, and this is the direction of it. And definitely, this is all could be animated later on. And the same thing, the bend axis can be changed from the x-axis to y-axis to z-axis. In my case, it's the z-axis because I wanted to bend on this axis. If you change it to y or the x, you get something like kind of weird now because it's a cylinder. But maybe some other cases you have to change this. Okay. You also have the limit effect if you need it, so you can limit this effect from the top, from the upper, or from the bottom. Okay. So if I want to have some kind of specific bending tool. In my case, I'm gonna keep this like 90 degrees and directions here. If you look at this bend or this cylinder, you can see that it's a bit jagged. It's not really smooth. What's happening in this case, I don't have enough segments in the height. So if I go to cylinder and I access the height segments, the more segments I add in the height, the smoother it's gonna be. So now if I add the bend like a bit more, it's gonna be smoother, much smoother. If I want it to be smoother, I can just add more segments in the height to make it like extremely smooth. Great. Second thing, I'm just going to access this box. I'm going to add a new modifier called twist. So, twist. This is the twist. Same thing. This is the twist modifier. I can twist an object. Okay. You can see if I twist this object a bit more, you can see that just like, let's say 360 degrees, which is a full circle, a full lap, you can see that the gizmo, which is the orange, makes sense that it's turning around, but the box is not. Why is that? Because the box doesn't have enough segments. It has just one segment. Okay, so if I go to the box and I add to the height segments more, you can see the more I'm going to add, the better visual I'm going to get. Okay, same thing for this box. I'm going to add a new modifier called taper. The taper, it has this kind of effect. I can scale the upper part of any object selected, and I can add a curve to it, outer curve or inner curve. If you can see, nothing's happening to this box because there's no segments in it. So I'm going to go to the box, hide segments, and I add segments. Now I can go to the taper, change my amount, and change my curve. And you can see the effect. If I go to the sphere, I'm going to add a new modifier called FFD. The FFD, it's like a cage with which make the object more organic, so I can just be able to deform it. I have different types of FFD, 2, 3 by 3 by 3, and 4 by 4 by 4. I'm just going to choose the 3 one to make sure you understand what does it mean. 3, it means like I have 1, 2, 3 lines in the width, 3 lines in the height, and 3 lines in the depth. Okay, so 3 by 3 by 3. If you add 4, it's going to have 4 width, 4 height, and 4 depth, and so on. So now, how to activate the FFD? All we need to do is press on FFD. You see it's turned off. Basically, it turned on something from the inside. I don't have to worry about it. So I just turn it on and off. So now it's off, now it's on. If it's on, I can just select my control points, and now I can move them or rotate them or scale them. So to make that's like this kind of deformation. For example, I'm gonna just hold this point and just move it inward, and I'm gonna get this kind of shape. This is what I want, then done. It's easily done. Okay, so using an FFD, I can make some kind of deformations. The last modifier I'm gonna use is basically the noise modifier. Just gonna select this plane, I'm gonna add segments to it, and then I'm gonna go noise. Noise will add a chaos to this object. For example, I have the strength, I need to push it up and down, which means on the Z axis. So I'm just gonna push it, let's say 10 centimeters on the Z. You can see that there's a bit of deformation in here, you cannot see much. The other issue we have is basically the scale. The scale is 100 units, so going up and down is very subtle. So if we go the scale downward, okay, you can see the ups and downs get closer to each other, which will make sense now. So now you can see the chaos I'm having on the Z-axis. Now if I want the push to be less or more, you can just adjust this. For example, if you want to create a terrain, you want to create some kind of water, liquid, or whatever, this is a good, very quick modifier. For example, I'm just going to make it a bit harsh. And now, because it's a bit harsh, you can see that it's a bit jagged. I can add segments to the plane, but sometimes I cannot add to the object I'm working with. So what I can do, I can add a modifier. One of the modifiers is called Turbo Smooth. Turbo Smooth is basically a smooth modifier. It will do smoothing for any object, and I have the iteration. The more iteration I'm going to add, the more segments I'm going to have, and the smoother I'm going to get, and the less it's going to be more jagged. So let's say I want it to be this kind of smooth, and you can see. Now it doesn't matter, as you can see, that I can have 2 or more modifiers, but it does matter which one is before which. For example, I have this cylinder which has bend, and I have this that has twist. If I add a bend modifier over the twist, the bend modifier, okay, and now it is twisted and now it's bended at the same time. While if I want to do the same thing in here, I have bend modifier and then twist, it won't be the same. So now I'm twisting the bend like this. So that's why you won't get the same effect. So you have to make sure what kind of a modifier you use first. For example, I have a taper and then I add the twist. So it's going to be tapered and then twisted like this. Okay? So you can add more modifier to each other. Same thing in here. I can just have my FFD and then maybe have some kind of twist to it. So I'm going to twist it like this, maybe, and then maybe add a turbo smooth to it to smooth it out and have it more smooth. Okay, so I ended up with this kind of shape, which is interesting. Okay, and as you can see, few clicks, I can add up some interesting models using my modifier.